In the matter of the people of the state of California versus Orenthal James Simpson, case number BA096.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
Boom. We are live and recording. Taylor, how are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm sick, actually, but
What?
I like my voice when I'm sick. It's very radio. It's very deep. It's very guttural. Some might say masculine,
Some might say that.
but nobody listening to this probably. So cool. We are recording, and today's a fresh day, and Taylor's got a fresh story.
I do. Wait, let me say welcome to
Oh,
Doomed to Fail. I'm Taylor, joined by Fars. We bring you history's most notorious disasters and epic failures. And earlier this week, Fars told us a scary story about planes colliding. And I don't know, it's not a scary story, but it's a fun one.
You got a fun
weird way.
story?
Mm, we'll define the word fun later. I learned a lot. Does that
That's
count?
fun.
Okay.
That's fun.
Great. So I had mentioned a couple of weeks ago that I was reading a historical fiction book, and this is the one that I'm going to make you guess. So the author of the book that I read, which I'll tell you the name later. If I told you now, you would know who I was talking about. Her name is Karen J. Fowler. And in the afterword of the book, she said what she was trying to understand in her research. And so, like, stuff she wrote, some of it is fact, some of it is like her extrapolating. Obviously, that's what historical fiction is. But she wanted to try to understand what the family of someone infamous for doing something really awful was like. In her example, she said, like, the family of a school shooter. Who are you before this happens to you? Who are you after? How did the family react? What made this one person in the family like this? Was the rest of the family like this? Like, what happened and how the family reacts. So I learned a lot about the family of this person, and then a lot of it I like have picked out what was true or not based on like other research. And can you think of someone who was famous for shooting someone?
Uh,
I have three hints. That's hint number one.
Three. Um, oh God, Oswald Booth,
Oh, you got it,
MLK's
Booth.
guy.
It's Booth. It's Booth. You
Oh,
got it.
it's Booth. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. So my other two hints were he was the most handsome man in America, and he was a very famous professional actor.
I thought you were gonna say me, but
No.
all right.
And I was going to also say that I'm trying to like express to you how famous the Booth family was. And so I was like, it's like the Baldwin brothers. But then Alec Baldwin actually did shoot someone. So I took that example away from my example. So I was like, it's like if the president of the United States was a huge fan of Elle Fanning. He was like, I love the great. I love her work. And then Dakota Fanning shot him.
That's probably a good example. There's the whole metaphor is like rife with issues that like could get caught in some sort of like
But I
filters
think
on
it's
the radio because Trump did get shot at.
no, totally. But I don't think, but I think that the point is like, yeah, but like, who was the person who shot at Trump? I have no idea. You
So,
know?
so I will say, like, when you started talking about this, my immediate thought was that you're talking about Dylan Klebold's mom because
Hmm.
she is super active on the circuit, talking about like, basically, she was like terrorized, and like,
Yeah.
obviously, she's living in complete hell because
Oh
she
my
lost her
God.
kid, her kid did something
Absolutely.
horrible, a bunch of people lost
Hmm.
their kids, like, and she's made it a point to be very vocal about it. So I thought we are
Hmm.
gonna go in that direction, but it's like the exact same concept. It sounds like you're gonna be
Yeah.
discussing here.
Yeah. But I just want to stress like how famous he was, and not just him, but his family. Like, these are famous people. Everybody in America who like
How famous
thought
could
about
you have been that what it was America in like the 1860s? There's only like 100 of us, isn't there?
no, there's a lot of, well, as far as we had a civil war during that time. So there were enough people to have a civil war and have the most Americans die in a war than any other war.
Right, like maybe like a million.
There were a lot of people here.
Fine.
And anyone who knew the theater existed knew about the booths, basically. Like that's they knew them. So let me tell you about them. They weren't necessarily rich, but they were like super famous. So we'll go to England to where his parents were born, and we need to know Shakespeare to understand this. I do not know Shakespeare. I don't know what happens in Richard III. I know what happens in Macbeth. I've seen Macbeth. I know what happens in Romeo and Juliet because I went to middle school, but like I don't really know a lot.
I know the Claire Forlani and oh my God, Leonardo DiCaprio version.
Yeah. I know the wait, the Claire Danes, is that what you
Claire
meant?
Danes. Who's Claire
Okay.
Forlani? Where'd that
I have
come
no
from?
idea. I've like never heard that word
Is that a real
before.
person? Oh my God. Yeah, hold on, Taylor. We gotta straighten this out before you keep going.
Anyway, that movie's great. Other things I know. Wait, I also love The Much Ado About Nothing with Keanu Reeves. That's
Oh, I
great.
remember. Yeah, okay. So I remember I had a crush on Claire Forlani when I was a kid. So she was the girl in Meet Joe Black that Brad Pitt's character
Yes.
fell in love with.
Mm-hmm. No, I know exactly what you're talking about. She is very pretty.
Sorry, it has nothing to do with your story. Please keep going.
No, it's fine. Oh, while I was over there for some reason looking at Claire Forlani online, I wanted to also add that John Wilkes Booth is 5'8". I think I'm going to say that later, but I just want to tell you that.
I
So,
fade. Okay.
so okay, but let's go over to England. Think about this Shakespearean family. So the father of the family is Junius, Junius, Junius Brutus Booth, which is a great name. He was born on May 1st, 1796. So he's born in England. His father was a huge supporter of the US Revolution. So his parents his family was kind of like, we don't love England anyway. His mother was related to a man named John Wilkes. So about 75 years before all of this, John Wilkes was a journalist who wrote bad stuff about the king. And he also was like the Lord Mayor of London and like was in the government, but was definitely like anti-royalist and like kind of a just like a I don't know, like a journalist who was like doing stuff, you know?
They sound like a shit stirring family. Like he's got beef with the king, then he
Exactly.
has beef with Lincoln. Well, not the same
hmm
guy, but still.
Well, that's fair
Same
because so
family.
and so obviously John Wilkes Booth is named after John Wilkes, this relative of his grandmother. But also I thought was interesting is John Wilkes was notoriously ugly and he was called the ugliest man in England, which is funny that his namesake is the handsomest man in America,
Weird.
you know? So if you think of what an actor looks like, and the good thing about this family is that we have pictures of them. It was like I'm very grateful that they did this during the time of photographs because it's helpful to see what they look like. But Junius Booth looks like an actor. You gotta go actor. He has this face that you can imagine has like a ton of expression. And all the pictures of him, he's wearing like a toga or like a beautiful costume, and he's like he's like a passionate actor. When he dies later, a journalist will say of his death, there are no more actors. Like Junius was like the peak of actors in history. Are you looking at him?
I am.
So Junius,
He does give me like Sean Penn probably takes himself a little too seriously for being like a play like
like
acting.
I imagine every single thing that you say to him, he responds to you with a quote from Shakespeare.
Yeah, I know. He sounds like the kind of guy at a dinner party you'd want to like get away from.
I feel like it'd be fun for like an hour,
He'd be
and then
fun
you'd
for
be
an hour.
like, I have to go. So imagine he's your dad. You know, he's a lot. So he would do things like so when he was acting, like he never was like rich. Like you were saying, like how many people know him? Because the way it would work is he would play Richard III the most often. That was his like biggest role that he would play the most often. So there would be towns, so like my town of Joshua Tree would put on Richard III and he would come and be Richard III. But everyone here, like we'd build the sets, we'd be all the other actors. And he'd come in and do Richard III for like 3 days. Then he'd go to San Diego and do their Richard III, the whole different cast, a whole different set, whole people. He would be like a traveling character. So he would like come home from these trips dressed like Richard III. You know, he owned his own costumes. Like his wife would make his costumes. Like it was like the house was full of swords and capes and like very dramatic stuff, if that makes
That'd be
sense.
kind of fun.
Yeah. I mean, well, it's not the best for his family, but like it's like a fun job, it sounds like.
Sure.
He was also an alcoholic. He was drinking a ton. There is one time where a theater manager locked him in a dressing room before a performance so he would stop drinking because he would often get on stage drunk and the audience would know, obviously. It was like, there was like it was like a peak where it was like just enough drunk to be really great at Richard the Third, and then like really bad at Richard the Third. If it like if you went over that hump. And while he was locked in his dressing room, he bribed a stagehand to buy whiskey, and he put a straw out the keyhole and drank the whiskey that way, which is funny.
Clever.
So a little bit of it happened in England, and then it happened in America. So in 1830, in 1821, he moved with his wife, Mary Ann Holmes, who was a flower girl at the theater, so someone who sold flowers at the theater. They met there and they fell in love, and they moved to the United States, moved to Maryland. Incidentally, a lot of famous people are in this story. Like he knew a lot of famous people. Like he knew Lord Byron, he knew Andrew Jackson. Like he's like connects the dots of a lot of folks that like we know as well. He wrote a letter to Andrew Jackson at one point, and threatened to kill him, and then later he said it was just a joke. But like,
So
it
I,
sounds
I
like he's like drunk texting people via mail.
I did read that part and was like, I think there's just something genetically wrong with this family.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's just like it's a lot. So Mary Ann, the wife, the mom of John Wilkes, is brought to the United States with this man, and she's like, he's an actor, he's famous. I'm gonna have this lavish life, and essentially he left her on a farm because his job was hard, and he had to like travel around. And once she started having kids, he she couldn't go with him, you know? So he kind of left her there. His dad came too. So she was on the farm and it was a lot of work to like maintain the farm, and they would like, bring their vegetables to like different towns to sell it and things like that. And they would like, they had crops. They also had a fair amount of enslaved people on their farm. So they were like poor, but like not poor enough to not have enslaved people, you know? That was like part of their growing up,
Right.
like, be around them. So Marianne has 10 children, and some of them are actors, some of them aren't. The first one is Junius Jr. He was sometimes an actor and a theater manager. He moved to San Francisco, which was like really hard to get to. So at one point, like Junius and another son, they go visit him, and they have to go down before the Panama Canal is made. You have to walk across Panama and like go on rivers and stuff, and then go up. So it's like a terrible, terrible journey. But he moved to San Francisco, was doing stuff there. Junius, they called him June. He was sometimes an actor. He wasn't as good as his brothers, but he gets married, and later his son is an actor in the movies, like the very beginning of the movies in like the 20s and 30s, which is fun.
Sweet.
There's Rosalie. Rosalie's called the Forgotten Child. We don't know much about her. She was kind of like a spinster. She lived, with her mom until her death. She never got married or did anything. Part of the reason that she stayed with her mom so much is after Rosalie was born, three other children were born, Mary Ann, Friedrich, and Elizabeth. All three of them died of cholera when Rosalie was 9. So her mom's grief just like kept Rosalie really close to her, and then she just like stayed with her mom for the rest of her life. So we don't know a ton about her, but that was it. There was another child named Henry Byron, because they knew Lord Byron. He died when he was 11, when the family went back to England just to like visit. So 4 of the kids died pretty young. The next son is Edwin Thomas Booth, and he is our Elle Fanning in our metaphor. He's a
Got it.
great actor. Yeah. So he's a fantastic actor. He is America's Hamlet and probably the best Hamlet of all time. I don't know what that means exactly,
Yeah. It's
but
big praise.
you know, the best at it. He also had his dad's nose and looked like an actor. He also has this, he looks just like his dad, has that same look. And so in the nicest way possible, Edwin and Julius in particular look like they can be on a Roman stage, you know? Like they look like they could be in like I don't know, whatever, like one of those big theaters in ancient Rome. They have that look to me.
I can see it.
You know what I mean?
I also
Um,
think it's because every picture you look at them, it could
they're
also be
dressed
like
like
a
actors.
statue.
Yeah, no, totally. That's fair. That's fair. There's a painting of Edwin when he's a little bit older, um, by a famous painter that is nice. He looks just like his dad. He's like standing up in a suit. So Edwin is going to be the one who spends time going with his dad when his dad gets too drunk to go around and do things. So he has to like go different stages with him and chase him around and get him to perform on stage. like things like that. Like his dad would like hide in a bar drunk and he has to go find him and bring him to the stage and like make him do these things. Um, Edwin also has drinking problems. He eventually stops drinking, but he gets married twice. The second time he marries a young actress, and she dies shortly after childbirth. In like I think we talked about this before, where I'm pretty sure she died just because the doctor like put his dirty hands on her
Ugh.
when she was like having a baby. Um, And so, but Edwin's the famous one. The next daughter is a girl named Asia. So she's going to marry Edwin's friend, John Sleeper Clark, and eventually they'll move to England because John Sleeper, I call him Sleeper, is going to be arrested because he knows the family after Lincoln's assassinated. And then they move to England after that. He wasn't a part of it, but they like arrested him under suspicion just because he was around. Asia did write a lot of writing. So she wrote a book about John Wilkes Booth and being his sister. So I didn't read it, but like that exists. So she wrote about it like firsthand, and she was very, very close to John Wilkes. In the book that I read, the historical fiction book, they were like she's also kind of a bitch. I don't know if that's true or not, but like strong-willed. And obviously, like the girls are not actors because a woman being an actor is like shameful, you know.
Wait, so did men portray women?
I don't think so at this time. That's a good question, but I think the women who were in the theater were considered like not that reputable. But the men were fine. I don't make the rules. I think that's
I
just how
think
it
you might.
was. Yeah.
And now look at us. And now look at the world we live in.
No, just look at it.
Just look at it and revel in Blake Lively's lawsuit.
Oh God. Yes. So then John Wilkes Booth. So he's the ninth of the 10 children. He was born on May 10th, 1838 in Bel Air, Maryland. Let's get back to him in a second. And the youngest son is named Joe. I don't know much about him, but when I Googled him, there was a talk that you could attend that was in 2008 in Bel Air, Maryland, about him. But alas, it's too late for me to go to that.
Right.
But that's it. So they live in Maryland, which is close to Virginia. They live on their farm. There is a house there called Tudor Hall that the dad built when he did make a little bit of money. It was also one of the things where like you kind of had to cross your fingers if dad brought the money home, you know? Like
Instead
he
of just
might,
drinking it.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Like he may go up to New York to do Richard III for a weekend and come back with nothing, or whatever. So it was definitely like up to him. But eventually he built a house called Tudor Hall. It's still there. You can visit it on selected Sundays. It's a National Historic Place kept by the Junius B. Booth Society. So you can still visit the house that they lived in Maryland. So we're in Maryland. The kids are living their life. Some of the older sons are out living their lives. June is already gone. Edwin's following dad around the country, getting him to get on stage, not totally drunk. And there's a secret.
Family. Totally different family.
Totally different family.
Yep.
hmm From before. So Junius was married before he met Marianne to a woman named Marie Christine Adelaide Deloney. He married her in 1814 when he was 19 years old in England. He met her in Belgium and they moved to England. He had also fathered a child in 1811 with someone named Sarah Blackbeard, which is cool. And there's nothing about that child. Like, no one knows what happened. When Junius left England to the United States with Marianne, he told Marie that he'd be right back and he was going to send her money, and he did send her money. Like he did, like keep this up, and not forever, but for a while, he did send her money and be like, "I'm going to be right back." Meanwhile, he's building this life with Marianne in Maryland. So they had two children before he left. The daughter died when she was young, but the boy lives and he grows into a man, and he's 25 years old, and he comes to Maryland and he's like, "Oh, hello. Is there a secret family here?" You know? And they started making a
Funny you should
scene.
ask.
Yeah. He's like, "Oh, I haven't seen you in 25 years, Dad. Do you perhaps have 10 children?" And they started making a scene starting in 1846, like following around the family, being like, this isn't a real family, blah blah blah, like yelling, like embarrassing the family. Eventually, And Junius isn't there during this. So like he's always on tour while his family's being followed around Baltimore by this woman who's like pissed, obviously. And but really she should have like known 25 years ago that he wasn't coming home.
Right.
But whatever. So she has to live in Maryland for 3 years before she can get a divorce, which again is ridiculous. Like you can't just get a divorce from this man who's been with another family for 25 years. No.
Yeah. Well,
But
laws.
she got it. She ended up getting her divorce. And in 1851, on John Wilkes's 13th birthday, his parents were finally married. So they did
Fun.
get married. So that was like obviously like, it's probably a weird and confusing time for the children for those 7 years when that woman was like following them around. So that's family. I think it's chaotic and like the way it's chaotic to like, live with a bunch of artists. And then like family secrets and lots of drinking. And the dad was often like, I don't know, criticized or described as like kind of living half in the world of Shakespeare, half out, you know? So
Yeah,
just like,
that's what you want out of a guy who's like just a stage actor his entire life and kind of a drunk.
exactly, exactly. So let's talk about John. Two weird things. When he was born, his mom had a vision. So she had a vision when Edwin was born. She saw like a shooting star, like he's going to be a star. And like, I don't know if that's true or not, but he was. So great. And then when John was born, she was up late with him and she saw the fire in the living room like come out of this fireplace and it spelled the word country and then went back in.
Huh, okay.
Which, is a bad omen considering the things that we know happened.
Yeah.
But she was like, I don't know what that means,
I
but for
also
myself.
think there's mold in the wall, and that's why she keeps seeing shooting stars in the word country.
I know. I mean, it's like 2 in the morning, you're holding your baby and it's dark and like you're exhausted. So there's that. But anyway, and then when he was in school, he went to like a military school. A teller read his palm and said he had a grim destiny, a short life, and he was doomed to die young, meeting a bad end. So
It's like, did I pay for this?
that's not what you want to hear from your fortune teller, for sure. But she was right. So he starts getting interested in acting and politics. When he's 16, he becomes a delegate for the Know Nothing Party. So that was like one of the parties that was around at that time. So that's the one that he was like officially a part of. And at 17, he becomes an actor, like his father. And they didn't necessarily want him to do it, but he was like he had a different style than Edwin and the dad. They just like but he was also pretty good at it. Like not the best, but like good at it. Um, so like his father was the actor. June was fine. He stopped being an actor. Edwin was exceptional, and John was good. Does that make sense?
Okay.
So he starts doing small
So
roles.
he was the Steve Baldwin.
Yes.
Edwin was the Alec.
Yes.
Okay, got it. Not in
Yeah.
the who they shot, not in who shot who someone, but just in their acting abilities.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. That's why I was like Ellen Dakota because I feel like that's like that. Anyway, so he starts doing small roles. He does when Edwin does Hamlet in 1858, John is Horatio. His favorite role was Brutus in Julius Caesar, which we know Brutus ended up, killing a tyrant is his claim to fame. And then he was also handsome. So it's something you have to think about when you're looking at pictures of John Wilkes Booth. Like tastes change, but like a Civil War reporter called him, quote, a muscular, perfect man, curling hair like a Corinthian capital. And like, okay. And I think there's one picture of him and Edwin and their dad where they're doing a play together where he doesn't have a mustache. And there I feel like I can see it a little more. You can't really see his face with that big mustache.
No, I think he was probably. I mean, he was probably a good-looking guy. Like, because I think at the time everybody had some deformity because life was so horrible back then that he just looked like he wasn't deformed, so he was handsome.
That's fair. That's fair. And he was a good actor, so people were like, ooh, he definitely had a lot of like girlfriends, like maybe got some people pregnant, and definitely people like thought they were engaged to him when they were
Yeah,
definitely
you know
not.
what? But like, I mean, think about it. Like, would we think like if who's an actor you think is really good looking?
My first thought was like Leonardo DiCaprio. Oh, no, Patrick Wilson.
Um, You know what? Patrick Wilson actually is pretty good looking. Leonardo DiCaprio, I think that if you were to see him today on the street and he was just like walking around in like New Balances and just like living his life, like you wouldn't,
It's
he
fair.
would not stand out to you.
But I am thinking Romeo and Juliet, Leonardo DiCaprio, and then he stands out because he's doing Romeo.
It's true. It's true. You know, I'm going off what some of my cousins said when I was a kid. I had a huge crush on Britney Spears, and she was like, she's not like you think she's good looking because she's famous. Like she's actually not like exceptionally good looking. I was
And it
like,
is. Yep, I think you're right.
but then I think that's probably. I mean, yeah,
It's a case in a lot of cases. So like,
true.
yes, if he was like, if he
Top
worked at your, if he was a butcher, he wouldn't be the handsomest butcher in America. But like,
Taylor, do you realize that when this podcast is famous, we're gonna be so hot?
yes, that is such a good point. I'm so happy for us. Great. Um, so fame makes you handsome. Good call. So he's traveling and acting, and people love it. At 1861, when the Civil War begins, he is in Albany, New York, performing, and he says kind of out loud that the South was heroic for what they did. He thought that the abolitionists were the problem because they were righteous and intolerant to the South. His personal views were that people of different races are inherently different, and that slavery was good for them because they were lucky to be taken care of, essentially. In most of his work is in the North. So even during the Civil War, though, he's going to be going like up and down the country to perform. His In 1864, the three Booths do Julius Caesar together. That's the one picture we have him without a mustache. And they raise enough money. Edwin, in particular, he did 100 nights of Hamlet in New York. Which was a record until John Barrymore broke the record in 1922, doing 101 in a row. But the money that they raised um, was for a statue of Shakespeare that is still in Central Park today.
Oh, cool.
So they raised the money. So here's another fun, weird thing that I don't know if you knew. So in 1864, Edwin is in New York. He's actually in Jersey City. So he's like close to New York, in Jersey City. And he's getting on a train, and a young man was on the platform of the train station, and he said, quote, this young man said, there was some crowding, and I happened to be pressed by it against the car body while waiting my turn. In this situation, the train began to move, and by the motion, I was twisted off my feet and had dropped somewhat, with feet downwards, into the open space, and was personally helpless, when my coat collar was vigorously seized, and I was quickly pulled up and out to a secure footing on the platform. So it was Edwin who saved this young man from falling through the platform of the train. And he saw him and looked at him and said, Edwin Booth, I know who you are. Thank you so much. And Edwin said, you're welcome. He didn't recognize the boy and he left. Guess who the boy was?
Thomas Edison.
Robert Todd Lincoln, Lincoln's son.
That is crazy. That's
Isn't that
proving my
crazy?
point. There was only like 50 people in the whole country back then.
Maybe, but I think that's wild. So Edwin didn't know who it was, but like he knew that Edwin Booth had saved his life, which is, and the Lincolns had a lot of bad luck. They lost a couple sons like later, so it could have been another son dead, but
Yeah.
Edwin saved him. So another friend they have is a man named John T. Ford, who owns some theaters. There's one in Baltimore and eventually one in D.C. The Ford Theater is a 1,500 seat theater that was open on November 9th of 1960 something. I can't, not sure where. Anyway, um, John was one of the first people to perform in Ford's Theater. He was in a play called The Marble Heart, and he was a Greek sculptor in a costume making marble statues come to life. At some point during that play, there's like a point where like he says something that is like I don't know if it's harsh or like whatever the character says, and while he's saying it, he shakes his finger in the direction of the balconies because Lincoln is there. Lincoln sees John Wilkes Booth in this play. And while he is delivering this line, he kind of shakes his finger in Lincoln's direction. And Lincoln's sister-in-law was there, and looked at him and she said, Mr. Lincoln, he looks as if he meant that for you. And Lincoln said, he does look pretty sharp at me, doesn't he? So like in public, he was like, I hate that guy, you know? And
Well,
Lincoln was there. So
if Facebook existed back then, he'd have a lot of like strongly worded memes and posts about him.
exactly. Oh my God, he's totally like all memes on his thing. Some of them are grayed out because they're proved to be not true. You know, like that's the kind of guy he is. Um, Lincoln actually saw Edwin perform more. But he saw him perform about 6 times. Lincoln, as we know, loved the theater and saw both Booth brothers perform. John does a little bit of an investment in oil in out west, which could have been good, but he left because he was impatient and he ended up losing a lot of money. He lost about $1 million in today's money. So John's successful at this point. Like he has enough money to invest $1 million in something and lose it as well. Um, he starts to be more sympathetic to the South. He loves Virginia. When he's there, he's like, "This is my home." It's very close to Maryland, but he's like, "I feel much better here because obviously Maryland was in the Union and Virginia was in the South." Um, his family was divided. Edwin voted for Lincoln. It was the first time he ever voted, and John was pissed at him. He was really mad. He told Asia, his sister, that he was smuggling medicine to the South. So he was part of a spy network that was bringing stuff to the South from the North because he could easily go through both of them because he was still performing during this time. Like, it's different, but he's still performing. In 1863, John Wilkes was arrested in St. Louis because he was heard saying that he, quote, wished the president and the whole damned government would go to hell. But he was just arrested for a little bit and then let go. Um, he was also probably part of a group called the Knights of the Golden Circle, which were people who wanted to have a country that was centered in Havana and did like a circle around the southern United States, Mexico, and like the northern South America. And so Havana would be in the center, and that golden circle would all be slave owning territories. So he's probably a part of that group as well.
So the country is the ship they float on?
No, the country's capital is in Havana, Cuba. So think of like take a protractor, stick it on Havana, and then like go out to like Georgia and then make a circle.
This is incredibly stupid.
Yeah, it's mostly water. And then like a lot
Yeah,
of
it's
like
if it's not continuous, how do you the whole point you do this because it's continuous so you can defend it.
I know,
Anyways,
Lars. I know.
bad idea.
So, John will get engaged to a woman named Lucy Hale, who's a Union senator's daughter, but he doesn't tell her that he's a part of all of these things, obviously. You'll also notice that he's not in the war because he's in his early 20s. You would imagine that he would be. He promised his mom he wouldn't be, but we can also assume that he paid to not be in the war, like most
Yeah,
rich
he
people
had
do.
bone spurs.
Yeah, exactly. So, a ton of people dislike Lincoln, of course, during this time. A lot of people want to kidnap him and do things. When I was reading something else about Lincoln, like when he gets to DC for his inauguration, he sneaks in at night on a train and he like pretends to be someone else and like sneaks in and afterwards he regrets doing that because he was like, I kind of showed that I was afraid when like I should have just like done it, but like people were obviously rightly very worried about his safety.
Also, it's
Um,
like, sir, you're the only 7'4" man with acromegaly
the,
in the world.
I don't want to be an asshole, but the handsomest man in America is 5'8". So
Yeah, exactly.
Lincoln is going to stand out. So, um, John Wilkes said that Lincoln was making himself a king, and he said, quote, he said this to Asia, to his sister. He said, that man's appearance, his pedigree, his coarse, low jokes and anecdotes, his vulgar similes, and his policy are a disgrace to the seat he holds. He is made the tool of the North to crush out slavery. And then I wrote, say that to my face, John Wilkes. So that's the mood. He's mad. He has a group of friends, and they're kind of like planning something, and they're like, riling each other up. There's a man named David Harold, George Atzerodt, Lewis Powell, and John Surratt. So they start meeting in John's mom's house to kind of talk about what they can do to like stop Lincoln. So the Civil War ends in 1865 in April. In that, right around that time, John Wilkes is out somewhere and Lincoln is in town wherever they are. And Lincoln does a speech about how he wants to, now that the war is over, give the freed enslaved people the right to vote. And that makes John even more mad, obviously. And obviously, when he said that, he meant men. He didn't mean women, he meant the men. And so in 1870, actually, men of any race could technically vote, but it's obviously complicated because of like poll taxes, and that wasn't fixed until like 1970s. So whatever.
Sorry, you said 1870?
That was in 1870 when men of any race could vote.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Women voted in like 1917, but whatever. But that made him even more mad. He hears that the war is over and he's pissed. And on April 14th, 1865, so just a few days after the war has ended, he goes to the Ford Theater in DC to get his mail because that's where he gets his mail. Like he's moving around a bunch. He knows John Ford. He's always there. Like he's so familiar with that theater that he gets his mail there. He Ford's brother, when he's there getting his mail, says, "Hey, are you coming to the theater tonight? Because Mary Todd Lincoln and Lincoln will be here to see the play Our American Cousin. Are you going to come?" And he was like, "Oh, I don't know. I didn't know they were going to be there." And Our American Cousin is a comedy play about a person named Asa Trenchard, who is a American who travels to England to claim his inheritance. And it's like funny because he's American and he's like rough and the British are pretentious. People like it. It's funny.
Humor must have been a lot different back then.
So it says it leads to humorous misunderstandings and cultural clashes. I bet it's funny. So it's April 14th. It's the day. So John starts making some plans with his kidnapping co-conspirators, and they're going to do 3 assassinations in one day. John's going to kill Lincoln. Powell is going to assassinate the Secretary of State, William Seward, and Asterode is going to kill Vice President Andrew Johnson. The idea is to like as many people who are in line to be the president as possible. Grant was supposed to be a part of the plot because he was also supposed to go to the theater, but he decided not to go. Probably because he was like not a theater guy. He's just like absolutely not.
Maybe he just didn't get the humor of that.
Yeah,
that play.
that's not. Yeah, he's not a comedy guy. So Grant doesn't go. He's already gone by the time the play is on. He leaves town to do something else. So John Wilkes talks to some friends. He has a getaway plan, like someone's bringing a horse around, and he can walk into the theater whenever he wants. He's a Baldwin. He's Dakota Fanning. Everybody knows who he is. Like he doesn't have to get past security. He doesn't have to like find out where the back rooms are and the back staircases. He knows it like his house, and everybody. It's not weird that he's there. He's supposed to be there, you know?
Right.
So it's during intermission of the play, he goes to a bar and then he comes back to the theater around 10:10 p.m. and he shoots Lincoln at 10:14. The people that are in the box with him are Mary Todd Lincoln and then Mayor Rathbone, the mayor of DC, and his wife. The mayor tried to stop him and was stabbed. And then he jumps from the balcony to the stage and he's holding his like gun and his knife. Maybe he dropped the gun, but he's holding his knife and he yells, "Sic semper tyrannis," which is Latin for "thus always to tyrants." Like,
And meanwhile, he's the most famous guy there, and everybody's like, "Is that John Wilkes Booth?"
you're like, is this part of the play? What is happening? Like,
That's got to be so confusing.
seriously, what is happening? I just heard a gunshot. People are screaming. All of a sudden, this famous person who's not a part of this production is on the stage yelling.
It's like
Like,
Lin-Manuel Miranda, but it like not in Hamilton, but jumping on the stage during Hamilton. It's like what?
right. Yeah. Yeah. Like jumping on the stage during The Lion King and being like, ah, and you're like, what? Like, so it must have been just absolute chaos and horrible. I mean, Lincoln died, a couple hours later. I think he died in the morning, but he never like regained consciousness after that. Um, Powell was able to stab Seward, but he was bedridden and he was seriously wounded but survived. And then Azerdat, who was supposed to kill the vice president, spent the evening drinking and never even tried. So
Which is what everybody should have done.
that is the best of the three. So now John Wilkes runs, and sometime in this he breaks his ankle, either jumping from the balcony to the stage or later on his horse. So at some point his ankle's injured and he's like injured and it's harder for him to leave. But he has a horse getaway. However, he gets on it and is like out of town. There's a show that I didn't even know was a show called Manhunt on Apple Plus about the hunt to find him. Which I feel like I want to watch now that we all had to restart our Apple Plus subscriptions to watch Severance. Maybe we could watch that.
I
Oh,
never
we
got
haven't.
an Apple subscription.
You have to watch Severance.
I never watched Severance.
You have to watch Severance.
I guess I'm watching Severance.
Okay. So I'm gonna watch that because that sounds fun. But Edwin Stanton is a Secretary of War. He's one of Lincoln's like team of rivals. So is Seward. You could learn about them if you read that Doris Kearns Goodwin book. But Edwin Stanton is a person who's in charge of the manhunt to find him. Um, and by 4 a.m. the next day, he's 25 miles away at his friend's house. Um, there is in today's money, a $2 million reward for him, but they want him alive. Just like Oswald, like they want to talk to him. Historian Dorothy Kuhnhart said, quote, almost every family who kept a photograph album on the parlor table owned a likeness of John Wilkes Booth and the famous Booth family of actors. After the assassination, Northerners slid the Booth card out of their albums. Some threw it away, some burned it, some crumpled it angrily. So, like, in this time, like, you have a family album and you have, like, your playbills in it? So, like, he's famous. It's like my binder with a picture of Leonardo DiCaprio on the front of it from 1996.
I probably still have my Weezer ticket from when I was 16.
Yeah. So like people still have the stuff and then they were obviously like, "Oh my God. Like we cannot believe this happened, how all that." Um Less people were excited than he thought. Like he also thought like I guess it kind of reminds me of Jack Ruby where he thought he'd be a hero and people were like a lot of people were like, "No." Like that's not good. So he had like less support than he thought he was going to, but he was headed south. Lincoln's body, incidentally, does a tour of a bunch of different cities. It goes up the East Coast. When Lincoln's body is in New York, there is a photo of a very young Teddy Roosevelt leaning out a window watching it, like watching the coffin go by, which is fun. And then also, incidentally, my grandfather marched in the parade with FDR's body when FDR passed away because he was in World War II. Which I think is fun. So John Wilkes Booth is near Bowling Green, Virginia, with his friends. Their name is the Garretts. They're saying, well, they're like friends of friends, and they're like, we don't know who, we didn't know who it was, but like, I don't believe you that you didn't know who it was. Like they're just like harboring this person. They're in the South. They probably, were.
Well, Taylor, like, how would news travel? Like,
Well,
it's
not that he did that, but like they said they didn't know who he was at all, and they like had him stay in the
oh,
barn.
okay.
And you're like, well, you wouldn't have Alec Baldwin stay in your barn. You'd invite him in.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, yeah,
Well, I think you would because you would. I mean, minus the shooting
yeah.
someone
Keep
thing.
guns away from him, but he can come inside.
I'd let Dakota Fanning inside.
She's harmless by comparison.
I know, but I'm saying if she was like the person who did it, you just wouldn't know.
It's true.
Like, you wouldn't know, but you'd know this person, but you
Right,
wouldn't know what they've done. Which,
right.
to your point, probably makes sense. So he's in a barn, and they track him down. I'm gonna watch Manhunt. I can tell you how they did it later, but they track him down. The barn's on fire, and so they're trying to. He's like kind of like walking back and forth and yelling. Like he knows he's trapped. He's in the barn. He is yelling, and a police officer named Boston Corbett shoots him in the neck. And he said that he shot him because he thought that he was going to shoot back at him, like he was defending himself. But people were mad at him for killing him. But like he was like, I felt like I had to defend myself. He shot him in the neck and he was paralyzed. They pulled him out of the burning barn. He died 3 hours later. His last words were useless, useless. And he was 26.
What do you think he meant by useless?
I feel like he meant because like people didn't,
Appreciate him?
yeah. But it was only like, it wasn't like,
How did he wouldn't know. He wasn't in the South yet.
I don't know, that's what he said.
Maybe they
He
loved
said,
him. Maybe they were gonna give a parade for him.
yeah. He said, tell my mom I did it for my country. Useless, useless. Whatever that means.
Also, like, I don't actually get the point of killing Lincoln in that situation. Don't you want to kill the generals who were just destroying? Well, actually, you know what? The generals weren't destroying the South. I think the South was doing pretty good. There was like a few moments when, like,
No, the South was doing horrible. He was smuggling medicine down there because people were dying of like malaria.
no, I know they're doing horrible economically. They had to print their own bullshit money. But I think that in terms of like their ability to like, because wasn't Stonewall Jackson? Yeah, Stonewall is the South, right?
hmm hmm
Anyways, I would assume you'd want, if you're trying to win the war, you'd probably want to kill the generals. Then like,
No, I think you want to cut the head off the snake.
but was Lincoln deciding where to put troops? Like, the presidents don't
I mean, the
decide
war's
that.
over. The war's over.
Oh, the war's
Anyway,
over. Oh, you
yeah,
know what? I should have asked that first.
the war just ended
I'm
like
like,
a week or two before.
got really
But
wrapped around the axle there.
yeah, who just ended. There's this weird spot in Charlotte because my in-laws live in Charlotte, in downtown Charlotte, which is super fun. But there's like in front of this like steak restaurant, there's a plaque on the ground that says, "This is where Jefferson Davis was standing when he heard that Lincoln was killed." And I'm like, it's weird.
Yeah, weird.
Why do you know that? But
Yeah.
whatever. Um, his fiance um had gotten his diaries and we see what he wrote in his journals and during that time he had written um our country owed all of her troubles to him, and God simply may be the instrument of his punishment. So he like believes that he had to kill Lincoln because Lincoln was the one who had done all this stuff to America. Um, his body was taken to the Washington Navy Yard for identification and autopsy. For some reason, some of his like vertebrae were removed, and those ended up being in a museum, which I think is strange. His body was buried in a penitentiary cemetery, and eventually his remains were given back to his family, where he's buried in the family plot. That was in 1869. He also was identified because he had a tattoo on his hand with his initials on them. It was JWB,
Really?
which is yeah.
Maybe that's they have to do that if you travel quite a bit because then if you die on the road. I
You
read
know
that
who you
his
are.
dad died of just drinking water that was like
Oh, I forgot to tell you his dad died. His dad did die.
yeah,
His dad died in on a boat going between San Francisco and back to the East Coast.
because he
Um,
drank water, right?
Potentially, or he just was like super drunk and he kept trying to jump off the side,
But that's
'cause
what
it seems
I think that
dramatic.
your the way of dying back then was so it could just happen for any or no reason at all, and
Hmm.
so you tattoo your initials so people know who you are. But then again, this guy was famous, so maybe that was
And
supposed to
again,
be
he's the
that.
most handsome man in America. I don't know. I don't know. So his family obviously is kind of going through it. So during the Booth book I read called Booth, obviously again historical fiction, but essentially like a lot of his family like heard Lincoln was assassinated, and then they were like, "Oh my God, that's terrible." And then they were like, "John Wilkes Booth did it," and they were like, "There's no way," like
Way
what
more
do we do?
terrible.
And then having to like barricade themselves. People were obviously upset with them, which totally makes sense. Um, so Asia, his sister, had left him a letter that was secret, and she opened it after he died. And the letter said, I know how foolish I shall be deemed for undertaking such a step as this, where on one side I have many friends and everything to make me happy. To give up all seems insane, but God is my judge. I love justice more than I do a country that disowns it, more than fame or wealth. So he was just like, so this is what God wants me to do. Edwin, his brother, said, fuck that guy. And he said, think of him no more as your brother. He is dead to us now, as he soon must be to all the world. But imagine the boy you loved to be in that better part of his spirit in another world. So he kind of was like, absolutely not, and totally disowned him. His co-conspirators, Lewis Powell, David Harold, and George Atzerodt, were all hanged at the old Arsenal Penitentiary on July 7th, 1865, so a few months later. Later, Edwin is going to go back to acting. He took a couple months off, but in 1866, in January, he goes back to being Hamlet. And again, he's America's Hamlet. He's like going to keep doing that forever. And he dies in 1891. So his brother just kind of went back to acting and was like, forget that guy.
He's only Hamlet.
He's
I
the only
know.
Hamlet America's ever had. Um,
He really radicalized himself. It's like
right. He
this
radicalized himself.
like reminds me now of like people just spend their entire lives on social media where it's like I don't think it's possible to spend all day on social media and not become radicalized one way or the other. So,
Absolutely.
but back then he had no social media, so he was a real go-getter. Like he really went and found the content himself
Like he would have been deep into like a internet rabbit hole.
in some trench, one or the other. It's, but that's the beauty of like the modern era and about like social media is you can become radicalized in like so many different things now, which
Hmm.
is like cool because you have variety.
That is such a glass half full answer to the world right now.
I
Good for
I
you.
gotta
Yeah, you can really find anyone on the internet these
you
days.
can really find whatever belief you have, you can find it on the internet.
Oh, gosh.
Well, thank you for sharing.
Yeah,
Um,
it was fun. It was interesting. I didn't know a lot about him.
I do want to do I do want to do. I do. I want to do a podcast on like. So, have you ever seen the movie? There's something wrong with Kevin.
Yes, I read the book, I think, also. But yes, that was so good.
Yeah,
Awful.
well, awful, but
Tilda Swinton's just
also,
amazing. Yeah.
but it also just introduced this whole angle of like, yeah, there's a life that nobody wants to know what it's like to have. They'll be really
Hmm.
interesting to find out what that's like.
Yeah.
Because if you did that, if your kid did that, you could end up like the guy I covered, having Matali hunt you down as
Yes.
Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm sure there were people who never saw an Edwin Booth play again. Plenty did, but I'm sure plenty didn't.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
they're a loss. He's America's Hamlet.
I know, for real. You should
Um,
watch Hamlet. I'm gonna look. There's one from 2009.
I'm not. I, I, I
Billy
disdain
Crystal's in it.
Shakespeare. All things Shakespeare makes no sense to me.
It's very hard to wrap your head around.
And if I'm being totally real, I think people that love Shakespeare are lying. They're lying. They don't get it either. They're just trying to be smart.
Potentially.
Okay, if you like
I don't
Shakespeare,
I don't disagree with you on that.
here's what I'll say. I like Shakespeare as a concept because his stories are what like most folklore like stories that we know now are like built off of. Like,
We should watch the Mel Gibson one because remember in Clueless when she's like, I remember Mel Gibson accurately. Remember
Mel Gibson, what did he do?
him? He was Hamlet in the 1990 version.
I'm still not gonna watch that. It was, yeah. I'll let you watch it and you tell me because I think we have the same feelings towards
I'm gonna
Shakespeare.
watch it.
But write to us at doingitfallpod@gmail.com if you actually think Shakespeare is good. If
Tell
you
us
actually
more.
sit down and read a Shakespeare book,
Right. If you tell me you've read all of them, I don't believe you. That you
that's
like understand all
crazy.
that you've read.
Yeah, that would be crazy. That'd be crazy.
Prove us wrong. Tell us more.
Sweet. Anything else, Taylor?
That's it. Thank you. Thank you. Find us Doomed to Fail Pod on social media. Email us doomedtofailpod@gmail if you have any ideas.
Hey, Miles.
What's up? It's Miles. It's Miles. It's Miles.
And that's Miles signing us off.
It's Miles signing us off. I'm gonna go ahead and stop recording.
Okay.